Hi, Tony. I thought I would just record this MP3 about what my thoughts really on this document, this podcast that you sent to me, because it was really fascinating. And as I've said, their research really dovetailed with the kind of things that I've been researching as well. And I think they've gone into it, or Michael McKibben and his team have gone into it in more detail. And it's just fascinating. And what they found out, really. I was going to say fascinating and depressing because it's really horrific what these people are getting up to. So I actually wrote down a few thoughts. I think that the whole power elite thing is unravelling like knitting. The real meaning of apocalypse is nothing to do with the end of the world. It means uncovering, unveiling, or revelation. And that's exactly what's happening right now. The powers that shouldn't be are showing their hand, whether unintentionally or not, but they're showing us what they're up to. At the start of this podcast with Michael McKibben, they were saying the missing pieces are shouting at us. And that's what I felt when I started looking into Klaus Schwab. I just thought it's what they weren't saying in Wikipedia that was shouting at me. So they've done research into these missing pieces of Klaus Schwab's online biography because it's clearly been cleaned up. And they also mentioned Ancestry.com, and they said that not all of his biography was on that, but there were some leads that they found from it because it's just been done in such a clumsy way. So it didn't take me very long to find Schwab's association with the Bilderberg Steering Committee. And also Michael McKibben and his team seem to have uncovered the mystery behind Klaus Schwab's mother, who appears to have been a Jewish woman who moved to the United States. I mean, this may be true and it may not, but this is the information that they've found. And it might be that she was fleeing for her life at the time. Apparently in Klaus Schwab's latest book, he claims that another woman was his mother. Maybe his brother could have been his stepbrother. They might have had a different mother because it seems that his brother does acknowledge their sort of true mother. It's quite confusing. But it does seem that there may have been this Jewish woman who Klaus Schwab has tried to leave out of the picture of his biography. And it's very significant because, as Michael McKibben and his team have revealed, Klaus Schwab's father's firm, Escher Wyss, was earmarked as a model Nazi company in the late 1930s. They discovered documents in the National Archives in Washington, which showed that Escher Wyss imported flamethrowers from Switzerland for the Nazis, and that Ravensburg, where the Schwab's family was, where Klaus Schwab grew up, Ravensburg is the place where the Germans first practiced eugenics, apparently, in 1933. And Michael McKibben also discovered in Norwegian archives that Escher Wyss started the production of heavy water, which is used for nuclear weapons, in 1929. Ravensburg apparently was a hub for the Allies moving gold out of Germany into Switzerland, according to this podcast. And it's really interesting that it was apparently an insignificant place and it wasn't bombed in the Second World War, but it obviously had much more significance than the official history was letting on. And after the war, Escher Wyss was merged with Sulzer AG. And then after that, there was involvement in the nuclear industry in apartheid South Africa. So it's really not a pretty picture at all. So the reason that this is important is that the more you look into it, the more you get a picture of this elite, which Michael McKibben and the other podcaster identify as the black nobility, who are using these powerful figures and institutions like the World Economic Forum to reassert their grasp on power. And it's not just over Europe, it's over the whole world now. Klaus Schwab was made a knight by Queen Elizabeth. So it's not some conspiracy theory. It's easy to find this out just through a few Google searches or Wikipedia searches. I don't use Google, but whatever search engine you use, the information is really there in plain sight. And the more you look into it, the dirtier it gets. I don't like talking about the Illuminati or the black nobility because it almost makes these people seem more special than they are. And I personally think that we are all to blame for all of this because it's through our laziness. I'm not really speaking personally, but through our communal laziness and complicity and wanting to keep our rotten jobs, being wedded to our lives of ease and convenience, that we've kind of given the nod to these atrocities. And I do think there are atrocities involved in this. Just as I've been saying in some of my podcasts, I think this is actually about the Fourth Reich. I see the Fourth Industrial Revolution as the Fourth Reich, and that's exactly how Michael McKibben describes it on the podcast. They describe it, the World Economic Forum, as a world economic fascism, and they've linked it with the Pan-European Union and aristocratic figures like Otto von Habsburg and Albert von Habsburg. So Otto von Habsburg spoke at the first meeting of the World Economic Forum in 1971. Apparently he was very outspoken against the Nazis, but he wanted to restore monarchical rule. And he also worked very hard to bring Eastern Europe back into the EU. And most of that sounds benign, but I think there always in the background, however much the talk seems to be quite egalitarian, in the background there's always this thing about reasserting monarchical or elite control. And I was really interested in what these guys said about the Holy Roman Empire, because in 2018 to 2019, I started to look into the origins of the EU, just because the Brexit debate was raging and people were getting so emotional about it, but no one seemed to have any actual facts about Europe. No one seemed to really understand what it was all about. So I thought I would try and find out for myself, because there were posts online about the origins of the EU, but they always seem to come from a very biased perspective. And I thought they might be true, but I really want to find out for myself. So I started doing research, and I actually started by looking at the EU's own information. And when I looked into the origins of the EU, I was really surprised when they were talking about the founding fathers, which sounded as if they were trying to compare it with the American Revolution. They spoke about these 11 founding fathers, all men, by the way, and 5 of these men had received the Karls Prize or the Charlemagne Prize. And this is a prize that's awarded at a ceremony in the town of Aachen on Ascension Day. I find it interesting that Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, who was instrumental in founding the Pan-European Union, which developed into the EU, he's not considered one of the EU founding fathers, but he was the first person to be awarded the Karls Prize in 1950. And that relates to the Emperor Charlemagne. Charlemagne was the king of the Franks in the 8th century, and he united Western Europe. Aachen became his imperial capital city, and he was crowned the Emperor of the Romans on Christmas Day in 800 by Pope Leo III. And this eventually evolved into the Holy Roman Empire. So when Germany was divided into principalities, the princes or electors would elect one of their peers to be crowned emperor by the Pope. And apparently the tradition of papal coronations was discontinued in the 16th century. But it's really interesting that Napoleon, when he was dominating Europe, had himself crowned emperor by the Pope. And it's really interesting that the EU seems to cling to this image of Charlemagne and the Holy Roman Empire. So there's even a young Charlemagne Prize. And the thing that interests me about this is not just looking back to history, but it's because this seems to be so critical to the way that the EU sees its foundations. But it's not just about a united Europe. It's about Europe united under a crown. That's the significance of this Charlemagne association. So I like to think that just as Napoleon met his Waterloo with Britain, maybe with Brexit, the EU is meeting its Waterloo. In the podcast with Michael McKibben, they discussed Mark Rich and the fact that he was pardoned by Bill Clinton in 2000. So I hadn't heard about Mark Rich, but I had heard about the company he founded, Glencore. And that company first came to my attention about 10 years ago because at the time it was merging with, I can't even remember the other company, but the CEO was being paid an absolutely extraordinary amount of money, and that's why it became newsworthy. So when I looked up Mark Rich online, he was the founder of Glencore. It was just a litany of high finance with mafia links and deals being done with the world's most horrific criminals in different places around the world. And while politicians, at best, the best thing you could say about it is that they were looking the other way. And this is all around us, this kind of criminality. I mean, the information about him, this man who I'd never actually heard of before I listened to that podcast, is available from a 2-second online search. So it's not something that you have to go and delve into the public records to find. It's staring at us. It's staring us in the face, and it's in plain sight. But it's not announced on the 6 o'clock news. And it's very easy for most people just to turn away from this kind of thing that's just like a cancer that's eating away at all our authorities, the whole society really that we live in, that we operate in. I sometimes think that it's a psychology that most people in a way have a knowledge of this, and they just don't want to face up to it. They don't want to face that the money that they earn, the things that they buy, all contributes to this, seamy side of life. So they prefer just not to know about it. And I sometimes think it's about accepting your shadow side, saying that I'm not trying to be a perfect person. You know, I love a good cup of coffee or a nice chocolate bar, and it's not always fair trade. Maybe that's come from a country where there's horrible things happening. Maybe the heating that I use, maybe, we all have links to this. And I think we need to face up to that. Most of us just don't want to think about it. And maybe that's where this sort of cognitive dissonance comes in. But with this COVID crisis and this coercion to have this vaccine, this is pushing us towards this crisis point where we have to fight this now. People like me who don't want to be part of this zombie apocalypse, we have to protest against this strongly, even to fight against it. And it's not something that we want to do. I would much rather just enjoy my comfort and my leisure time. But, the air that we breathe is being restricted by this. Mine's not, because I refuse to wear the mask. But when you have to wear a mask, it's actually the air that we breathe that is being restricted. We're being forced to breathe in fibres instead of fresh air. And that's brought us to this point where it's, you have to decide which side you're on and whether you're going to fight it or not. The gauntlet is being laid down. But at the same time, the real attackers are exposing their identity. So I suppose there's a lot more I could say about this, but I'm going to stop and let me know if there's any other points that you'd like to discuss. Thanks.